As many of you, I think, know, a long time ago, I was a practicing lawyer before I entered into the seminary. I did that for about 13 years. And I remember when I entered the seminary, I found myself engaging folks like lawyers sometimes can in heated debates and discussions, engaged in theological issues. And I always felt like I had to convince the other person. And all that changed about a month or so before we left seminary. There was a saintly old Norbertine priest, Father Al McBride. He taught us homiletics and a class on the priesthood. And right before we were leaving the seminary, he looked to those of us who were about to be ordained priests, and he said, "Gentlemen, always remember, we propose the faith. We don't impose it." And I have never forgotten that. It's such a great insight since it honors and acknowledges the free will that God has given to each and every one of us as that wonderful expression of his love. And as priests, we have to be very careful not to impose anything on anyone, because God never imposes himself on us. He only proposes and invites. And today in our gospel, we see that dynamic of the greatest proposal ever in the event of the Annunciation. We have to remember that it is just that. Mary is totally free to respond to this incomparable invitation that comes to her. Whenever I hear this gospel, I'm struck by the gravity of this moment. Can you even imagine how Mary would have felt? What she thought? The salvation of all of humanity hangs in the balance. And in that moment, Mary gives you and me a great example of what we are to do each day, as we too receive each day the invitation of the Lord. Mary is, of course, completely open to the voice of the angel. She is full of grace. She is pure and sinless. She has always had her eyes totally and focused on God's will for her. And sadly, for the most part, we're not like this. We suffer from those effects of original sin, and our focus too often is on ourselves. And so we miss opportunities that God wishes to come to us. We don't look at his plan for us. We succumb to the temptation to look at what we want. And I think this is what our first reading is meant to show to us. David's reflecting upon where he is in relationship to the ark, focusing on what he has done and what he should now next do. And that sounds like all of us, as we need to do that somewhat as we plan our daily living. But that night, the Lord speaks to Nathan to deliver this message to David. Not to look at what he has done, but to look at what God has done for him. It was I who took you from the pasture. I have been with you. I have destroyed all of your enemies. I will make you famous. I will fix a place for my people Israel. God doesn't say to David, "You've really been great." He gently reminds David of how great God has been to him. Can't we see how this perspective will change everything? Mary doesn't say to the angel, "Let me think about it. Let's discuss a little bit more the costs and benefits of this proposal." She says, "May it be done unto me according to your word." In our second reading, St. Paul does not try to highlight all of his insights, but he speaks about the call that each of us has received, which is the obedience of faith. And so instead of trying to intellectualize, maybe a little bit too much, too often about what God is calling us to do, trying to figure it all out, let's strive to simply accept what each day presents to us. In our families, we're not to wish that things were different, that our children or our parents should be better, but to accept each other of who we are as a priceless child of God, whom he promises to always sustain by his grace. That our jobs were not to complain about the burden and tedium of work, but to accept those struggles as part of this mysterious plan of God's salvation and his sanctifying work in our lives. And in all the sufferings that are ours, and in the death that awaits us, we're not to succumb to the temptation to despair or to fear, but to allow the joy and the hope of the resurrection to sustain us always. Mary desired nothing more than what God desired for her. This is the secret to holiness and to happiness. And so on this last Sunday of Advent, which is the last day of Advent this year, the church takes us to this remarkable proposal that God presents to Mary. Let's see in that moment a symbol of what each moment in our lives is. God calling us and inviting us to a deeper communion in him. And let us strive to follow Mary's example, not focusing on self, what we think we want or we need, but keeping our focus always on God and what his plan is for us. So that in all the events of each day of our lives, and all that God proposes to us in all of those events, we may respond like Mary. May it be done to me according to your word.